The grave of the female stranger is a famous historical oddity as well as a local landmark and visitors' attraction in St. Paul's Cemetery of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Alexandria, Virginia. The grave is the resting place of an unnamed individual who died in 1816 and was elevated to national intrigue by the mysterious headstone and romanticized tale. Accounts of the stranger increase in oddity over time and help to incite further speculation as to the identity of the person buried in the grave. The reported location of the woman's death, room 8 in Gadsby's Tavern, is restricted as Gadsby's Tavern does not wish to incite any rumors about this woman, and supposedly her ghostly visage can be seen standing at the window. The story has sparked conjecture that has continued for more than a century. In addition to various articles and reports, there have been novels, including the narrative of John Trust of 1883 by Alexandria bookseller and newspaperman William Francis Carne, author of George Washington's Boyhood. So let's get into this mysterious female stranger. In May 1833, a poem regarding a visit to the grave of the female stranger was composed for the Alexandria Gazette and published almost a year later, in March 1834. This was at first submitted under the initials S.D. and was later found to be the work of poet Susan Rigby Dallam Morgan of Baltimore, when her husband, the Reverend Littleton Morgan, published his wife's poems posthumously. The earliest appeal to the national audience was in 1836, when columnist Lucy Seymour of Maryland recorded the account in the Philadelphia Saturday Courier. Lucy Seymour was the pen name of Susan Rigby Dallam Morgan. In Morgan's account, the stranger had been a young foreign woman with a tearful face and a pale complexion. The woman also seemed ill and troubled. The stranger's male companion appeared inauthentic to the locals as her husband. The man quickly left after the stranger was buried in Alexandria. The only person that the stranger confided in was a local pastor. Morgan's sources are not explicitly named. She implies that she took interest in the St. Paul's Cemetery first and then began to ask questions about the interesting grave site. This pattern of discovery closely mirrors her earlier poem. Furthermore, Morgan speculates that the tombstone inscription was written in a manner strangely calculated to awaken interest and elicit sympathy. In September 1848, the Alexandria Gazette published a response to an article about the female stranger written in the Baltimore Sun. The Alexandria Gazette writer states that the woman who arrived was indeed a beautiful woman of a pale complexion and further elaborates on her grace and the admiration of those around her. The author adds that her companion's surname was Clermont and that after his sudden departure, it was revealed that $1,500 in English currency he had used to pay his bills was counterfeit. Lawrence Hill, one of the men to whom the money was owed, confronted Clermont sometime later at Sing Sing prison, supposedly. Lawrence Hill was an actual person. He was a businessman living in Alexandria at the time. He sold his house in Alexandria in 1830 and moved to New York. He died of cholera in New York in the spring of 1849. In the 1880s, the rumor emerged that the woman may have been Theodosia Burr Alston, the daughter of Aaron Burr, who was lost at sea in 1813. However, this idea seems contrived, and the dates given for Theodosia and the stranger are not entirely consistent. Theodosia would have been a few years older when she was discovered in Alexandria, and how did she get there after she was shipwrecked off the coast of Georgetown or North Carolina? She would have had to survive the sinking of the ship Patriot. Several months after the War of 1812 broke out, Alston's husband was sworn in as the governor of South Carolina on December 10th. As the head of the state militia, he could not accompany his wife on a trip north. Burr sent Timothy Green to accompany her instead. Green possessed some medical knowledge. On December 31st, 1812, Alston sailed aboard the schooner Patriot. The Patriot was a very fast ship. It had originally been built as a pilot boat and had served as a privateer during the war when it was commissioned by the United States government to prey on English shipping. It had been refitted in Georgetown, its guns dismounted and hidden below deck. Its name was painted over, and any indication of recent military activity was entirely erased. The schooner's captain, William Overstocks, decided to make a rapid run to New York with his cargo. It is likely that the ship was laden with the proceeds from privateering raids and very heavy. The Patriot and all those on board were never heard from again. Immediately following the Patriot's disappearance, rumors arose. The most enduring was that the Patriot had been captured by a pirate and that something had happened near Cape Hatteras, notorious for wreckers who lured ships into danger. Aaron Burr refused to credit any of the rumors of his daughter's possible capture, believing that she had died in the shipwreck. One story, which was considered somewhat plausible, was that the Patriot had fallen prey to the wreckers known as the Carolina Bankers, who operated near Nags Head, North Carolina, and were known for pirating wrecks and murdering both passengers and crews. Why the Patriot would have been headed towards North Carolina when it was bound for New York is not known. When the sea did not serve up wrecks for their plunder, the bankers would lure ships onto the shoals. On stormy nights, the bankers would hobble a horse, tie a lantern around the horse's neck, and walk it up and down the North Carolina beach. Sailors at sea could not distinguish the bobbing light they saw from that of a ship that was anchored. Often they steered towards shore to find shelter and meet the light. Instead, they became wrecked on the banks, after which the crews and passengers were killed. In relation to this, Mr. J. A. Elliott of Norfolk, Virginia, made a statement in 1910 that in the early part of 1813, the dead body of a young woman with every indication of refinement had been washed ashore at Virginia's Cape Charles and had been buried on her finder's farm. But the rumors persisted long after Burr's death, and after around 1850, more substantial explanations of the mystery surfaced, usually alleging to be from the deathbed confessions of sailors and executed criminals. In September 1886, Chicago's Hyde Park Herald published Frank George Carpenter's piece about Alexandria, Virginia, including a section about the female stranger. This telling includes a doctor, sworn to secrecy, 2 French maids, and a reclusive English husband who would not allow anyone to see his wife's face or attend her funeral. The author touches on how Alexandria was a wealthy trading port at the time, and it would not be odd for foreign diplomats to land there. In addition, perhaps the wife had another jealous lover, or she was a famous American such as Theodosia Burr Alston. In 1887, Colonel Fred D. Massey of Alexandria wrote to the Cincinnati Commercial Gazette, which was later published nationally, that while the legend is well spread, it has only helped to further tangle the story and add to confusion. The author's version of the story was that a noble couple, seemingly English, arrived by ship with a valet. The wife was a voluptuous blonde with large eyes and a small mouth. She became ill in Alexandria while the couple lived at the leading hotel at the time, Gadsby's Tavern. The husband, valet, and doctor were the only ones to see her during the illness. She died in her husband's arms, locked in a kiss. Further, only the husband and the valet were present at the burial. The husband left by ship and was later reported to have been seen in New Orleans. He is rumored to have returned to Alexandria in the dead of night with a crew of seamen and exhumed the body, taking it with him. The Times-Picayune of New Orleans then took up the mantle and rather boldly published in January 1893 that the grave was Theodosia Burr Alston's and that her husband, Governor Alston, was seen visiting the grave approximately 70 years prior to the article. In the 1890s, the concept of the couple being star-crossed lovers continued. In May 1898, the Washington Evening Star reported that 2 elderly people visited the grave and told Church Superintendent Webb that the female stranger was a connection of theirs, an English noblewoman who ran away with a British officer for love. They also said that they would visit again with more details, but never returned. Many subsequent accounts have included all or most of these elements. There is also an addition of 2 local women sworn to secrecy, helping the stranger during her illness. The most modern retelling of the story is recorded perhaps as early as 1913 and is quite elaborate given that it was published nearly 100 years after the stranger had died. A large spread, including dramatic illustration, was featured in the Ladies' Home Journal for January 1913. It tells of the brig Four Sons en route from Halifax, Nova Scotia to the West Indies, diverting her course for the Potomac River and letting off a small lifeboat carrying a man and a woman. A sick woman covered in a black veil was lifted out of the boat and carried to Bunch of Grapes Tavern, a misnomer for Gadsby's Tavern, due to the image on the establishment sign. The man, assumed to be the husband, found the best room at the tavern and sent for the doctor. The doctor was sworn to secrecy, and the woman's face remained covered. 2 women staying at the hotel were also sworn to secrecy and helped to nurse the sick woman. Was this due to a potentially contagious disease the woman had, and nobody wanted to alarm the public? The husband alone witnessed the death, prepared the body for burial, and sealed the coffin. He disappeared, but returned every fall to put flowers on the grave. At some point, the grave fell into disrepair, and 3 elderly people appeared at the site. When questioned by the church sexton, they revealed they were relatives of the woman and that she had married a British officer. Another theory suggests that the woman was Sarah Curran, fiancée of Irish revolutionary Robert Emmet, who may have been forced to marry a British naval officer. However, this unknown author further acknowledges that this is pure speculation, which is true since after the beheading of Emmet, Curran died and was buried alongside her father in County Cork, Ireland, not America. This is the account of Miss Ellen Earnhardt Morrison, published in 1971. Morrison dug deep into the record, and she is more well known today for her book on Smokey the Bear. One cannot underestimate the value of white American female scholars and biographers who latch onto these stories and try to bring them repeatedly to the surface of American consciousness. Here is Morrison's Lady of Legend. It takes an old building, mellowed by tradition and tender memories, to nurture a 155-year-old legend. Legends take time, and Gadsby's Tavern and City Hotel has had plenty of time. This 3-story Georgian brick building at Cameron and Royal Streets in Alexandria, Virginia, is a familiar landmark dating back to the 18th century, as it had one of the biggest ballrooms in colonial America when it was built. Famous people, including Washington and Lafayette, frequented Gadsby's on many occasions. Its peanut soup is still sold today. But the most touching episode in its long history occurred in a little room on the 2nd floor and lingers in legend as an unsolved mystery. The story began when a ship, possibly a merchantman from the West Indies, dropped anchor in the Potomac River just off Alexandria in September 1816. A well-dressed gentleman and his ailing wife came ashore and were shown to the City Hotel just a few blocks from the waterfront. The husband demanded the best accommodations but would give no name. The lady, obviously of good family and gentle breeding, leaned heavily on his arm near exhaustion. "My wife is very ill," the gentleman said urgently. "Please summon a physician at once." With that, he carried his wife upstairs to her room. Dr. Richards arrived a short time later and hurried to the sick woman. Her ailment was diagnosed as typhoid. She must not be disturbed, the physician ordered, and made arrangements for 2 local women to share the nursing care of his patient. Who are they? Where did they come from? Doctor, nurses, and hotel staff were plied with constant questions by curious townsfolk. But if they knew, they were sworn to secrecy and said nothing. "They say she wears a mask when anyone comes in the room," said one of the rumors that ran around town. As time passed, the husband made the acquaintance of hotel and tavern people, but persistently remained anonymous. He was never away from his wife's bedside for very long. She hovered between life and death for many days, and he alone was with her when she died on October 14th. It is said that, to ensure the secret of her identity, the husband himself prepared the body for burial and closed the coffin. She was quietly interred in St. Paul's Cemetery, and the bereaved husband ordered a handsome tombstone for her grave. Now we'll learn who she was, many people thought, but they were disappointed. Even in death, the lovely lady remained a mystery. The inscription on her gravestone reads, "To the memory of a female stranger whose mortal sufferings terminated on the 14th day of October 1816, aged 23 years and 8 months. This stone is placed here by her disconsolate husband, in whose arms she sighed out her latest breath, and who under God did his utmost even to soothe the cold dead ear of death. How loved, how valued once avails thee not, to whom related or by whom begot. A heap of dust alone remains of thee. 'Tis all thou art, and all the proud shall be. To him gave all the prophets witness, that through his name whosoever believeth in him shall receive remission of sins." Acts 10th chapter 43rd verse. This last stanza harks back to the poetry of Alexander Pope, also an Englishman. An unsavory part of the legend claims that the husband afterwards turned out to be quite a scoundrel. He left Alexandria without paying numerous debts, including the bill for the expensive tombstone. One account says that he was later seen in a prison yard at Sing Sing in New York, but even prison officials did not know who he was because of his many aliases. Perhaps you'd rather gloss over this ugly version. Ask yourself, could someone who composed the tender sentiment of the tombstone be such a villain? Many people have fallen under the spell of the female stranger and tried to establish her identity. Immediately comes to mind the missing Theodosia, charming daughter of Aaron Burr and wife of the governor of South Carolina. But Theodosia and her husband both disappeared on a sea voyage from Charleston to New York in 1808. Neither ship nor passengers were heard from again. This happened 8 years before the stranger came to Alexandria. Again, this account is not entirely true. Some writers have told varying versions of the story. A popular version is The Narrative of John Trust by William F. Cairn, published in 1883. John Trust was one of 4 English orphans, 2 brothers and 2 sisters who were separated in childhood. John was adopted by a wealthy gentleman and brought to Alexandria, where he lived until grown. Then the guardian took him to travel and live in various parts of the world. In India, he met John Roe, a strange man given to mesmerizing and similar pursuits. Their paths crossed again at Martinique. There they fell in love with the same girl, Blanche Fordham, who suddenly eloped with Roe one night. Disillusioned, John Trust returned to a former address in France and found a letter from his long-lost twin sister who had traced him. She was going to America to live in Alexandria, hoping he would return. Trust hastened there for a happy reunion with his sister. Years later, Trust saw Roe in Alexandria one day, going into the cemetery. He went the next day to see why Roe had been there and came upon the grave of the female stranger. Roe appeared and, satisfied that Trust felt no malice toward him, revealed that it was Blanche's grave and told an amazing story. He had known in Martinique that Blanche favored John Trust, so using hypnotism, Roe persuaded her to marry him and take passage on a ship bound for the United States. He later repented, confessed to Blanche, and offered to return her to Martinique to annul the marriage, but she was too ashamed to go back home. During the voyage, Blanche became ill, and the couple went ashore at Alexandria. She died at the city hotel, begging Roe to keep her identity secret. Much more happens in this narrative, and so many actual names, events, and landmarks are woven into it that the tale sounds plausible. But was there really a John Trust, or was he a figment of the author's active imagination? Side note, a manuscript of this has come up for sale in South Carolina. Another interesting version was written by Charles T. Johnson Jr. in 1912. The young woman in this story was the ward of an English lord who fell in love with her. When she refused his marriage proposal, a fight ensued between the enraged guardian and the girl's fiancé. The guardian fell, struck his head, and died before help could be summoned. Fearing scandal and blame for his death, the young couple married and fled to America on a British ship, aided by the groom's brother, a naval officer. Avoiding British authorities, the brothers showed them a lovely spot on the Potomac River near Georgetown, a few miles above Alexandria. They built a cabin there in autumn 1815. Then the brother returned to England with his ship. Georgetown was a fur trading post at the time. During the ensuing months, the young husband went into Georgetown alone when supplies were needed. In the meantime, the wife fell ill that winter and grew worse through spring and summer. Seeking medical help, the couple drifted in a small boat downstream to Alexandria in late summer. At the wharf, a kind Quaker helped them ashore and furnished transportation to the city hotel. When the wife died there on October 14th, her husband ordered the mysterious tombstone in her memory. Unhappily, he went back to the lonely cabin near Georgetown. When his brother returned some time later, the cabin was deserted and the husband's remains lay by the river. A letter told the tragic story and asked that the dead man be buried beside his beloved wife. Since the burial could not be done publicly without revealing identities, the brother had friends help him open the grave one night and place the husband's remains with those of the wife. If this story were true, it would pose an interesting question. Are there really two strangers in the grave? Take the different versions of this legend, mix them together with a grain of salt, and sift out the fiction. One fact remains: there really was a female stranger, and she really did live at Gadsby's Tavern. And in the cemetery across town at the west end of Wilkes Street, you can find her tomb and read the unique inscription. It's only fair to warn you, however, before you make this pilgrimage in search of a legend. Once you visit the haunts of this lovely unknown, you'll forever be captured by the fascinating question: who was the female stranger?